Hello everyone, welcome to a new chess video. Make sure to save this video because it's going to become one of your favorites on the entire YouTube platform. I'm going to teach you how to play the French defense in all its variations. In other words, once you've finished watching this video, you'll be fully prepared to start playing the French defense, and they won't be able to surprise you with any variation. Alright? What is the French defense, chess teacher? It's that simple. When they play the king's pawn, e4, we'll play e6. For those who have no idea what the French defense is, it's very simple. We don't occupy the center directly because we're preparing with an e6 first to then play d5. Here, everyone plays d4. Why? Because they take advantage of the fact that we haven't occupied the center to occupy themselves with their two pawns, right? And it's the correct way to continue. Whenever the center isn't occupied, placing their two pawns completely centralized. Notice how their two bishops come out. Well, their two knights too. They have a wonderful position. And here, we're going to play d5. Up to here, we have the French defense. It's that simple. But here, there are four main variations that we're going to reduce to three. And I'm going to explain them to you in such a simple way that you'll be able to play them without any kind of problem. Without having studied entire books on the French defense just by watching this video. So, if we reach 300 likes on this video, I'll make the same video with the defense or opening that you prefer, and leave for me in the comments. So, let's go. What options does White have here? Well, first I'll explain it to you, I'll explain what options they have, then we'll detail them one by one. The main one, and the one they play against you almost always, is this one here, the advanced variation. They play e5, right? Why? Because here they're left with a lot of space, and we're left with much less. Now I'm going to teach you how to counterattack and how to play against that, because we have some spectacular plans. The other variation would simply be the exchange variation. What happens if they capture this pawn here, and how do we have to play? And finally, the Tarrasch variation, or the knight c3 and knight d2 variation, which really doesn't matter to us because we're going to play the same way, and it's very simple. So come on, let's go to the rodeo, put your boots on, because we're going to start directly with the advanced variation. Perhaps the most played variation. Mind you, you shouldn't overlook any of the variations, because if you study one more than the other, they might play the other variation and you'll end up worse off, right? Very well. The most popular one, the advanced variation. What are we going to do when they play this advance here? Well, our plan, most of you should know it, but if not, I'll explain it to you. It's very simple. It's the fight against this pawn here. This d4 pawn is White's main favorite because it's the one that's holding the position together. Look closely. If this pawn disappears, look at the weakness they have here. We'd probably end up winning it, right? So we'll just start with c5 whenever they play the advanced variation. Right here, they only have one good move, and that move is c3. Defending this point, if they defend it with another piece, like the knight for example, simply pawn takes pawn would be giving us a pretty significant advantage, since now this pawn is going to be very hard to defend, and we're going to have a brutal initiative to attack with our knights, even through here and here with the queen. They'll practically never be able to defend it unless they weaken themselves a lot with this pawn, okay? So here, they only have one good move when we make the move c5, which is c3. Everything's correct so far. How should we continue? Well, we'll just continue with knight c6, with the main goal of the French defense advance variation. Remember well, attack this point right here. We're putting pressure on this point. Perfect. Our opponent's going to play the good one, obviously, which is knight f3. It develops a knight and defends the d4 point. Like I said, don't worry if they don't play this against you. I'm giving you the best variation for white because from here, if you use this plan with an inferior variation for white, you'll end up even better. Okay? So don't worry. Very well, knight f3, and then here we're just going to play knight e7. And I'm going to explain why. If some smart aleck tries to defend this point with f4, then you'll play knight h6. It's an ideal player. Why? Because now this bishop can be exchanged for this knight, and therefore we won't have to double our pawns. And besides, this knight's going to have a spectacular square on f5, and it was going to hit this d4 point, which is what we want, remember? However, we're only going to do this if they play f4. Notice that if they play the normal knight f3, we'll bring out this g knight through e7. Why? Because if we bring it out this way, they'd exchange and we double our pawns. Instead, from here, it's already aiming at the f5 square again to come and attack this point. Look closely. You must understand something very important whenever they play the advanced variation against you. We have a good bishop and a bad bishop. Okay, this bishop is the bad one. Why? Simply because it's crashing against our own pawn structure. This bishop is good, even though it seems like it doesn't have many possible developments. However, you're going to see, next, that this bishop is going to be very useful in the opening. Mind you, it's important to develop this knight first, because if we develop the bishop first, look closely, this knight can't get out here, or here, because the bishop is there. So it's very important to first bring this knight out to e7, okay? Very well, our opponent can continue with many ideas. They can develop this bishop, which is the most normal thing to be able to castle quickly. Yeah, basically, if they play, for example, bishop d3, which isn't the one I'm going to recommend to you, what should you do? Well, simply pawn takes pawn, and start putting pressure on this d4 square. I'm telling you, it's going to be a real headache for your opponents to defend this square. Alright? So let's assume that here, instead of placing the bishop blocking the queen's defense, he puts it on e2, maybe a slightly more precise move. In that case, we're simply going to do the same thing. We're going to capture. You see, it's very simple to play if you understand the concepts well. I'm going to put all my effort into explaining it in a way that all of you are able to understand it the first time. And even if it's not the first time, just by watching this video as many times as you need, you'll be able to play it perfectly. Perfect. We trade these pawns when they develop the bishop. Remember that. First, we develop the knights, and then we trade here. With what idea? Well, simply knight f5. Notice that we're doing the same thing all the time. For now, notice one thing. We're attacking this pawn with 2 pieces, and they're defending it with 2. So for now, they shouldn't worry. If they simply play a move here, like castling, what we're going to do is keep pressing this square with queen b6. And as you can see, all the moves here are already starting to be dangerous for white. Notice that either they play perfectly, that's the good thing about this defense, either they play perfectly or our pressure will be brutal. Here we already have a fairly significant advantage. Now we're attacking this square with 3 pieces, and there's no satisfactory way to defend this square. Because surely you're all seeing that the only way to defend the d4 square is bishop e3. And bishop e3 has a serious problem. It's giving up a pawn. Which pawn is it giving up? This pawn on b2's. As you can see, it's giving up this pawn. He should develop this knight. We keep attacking this square. In other words, here, after the move queen b6, we're attacking this d4 square too much, and things are getting too complicated for the white pieces. That is, let's go back one move. When we play knight f5, they have to be precise, alright? They can't just play castling or something that makes no sense, because then we'll simply play queen b6, and we're gonna gobble up that pawn. And I'll tell you one thing. Once you gobble up this pawn, which you'll manage to do in many of your games, what's going to happen? Not only will you have an extra pawn, but you're going to blow your opponent's entire position wide open, because now this pawn that's very well supported would stop being super well supported, and the position will be so easy for you to play that you'll achieve great success. Now then, what moves should they make instead of castling? Well, they have several moves here. The main and best one is knight c3. And I'm going to explain why. The good thing about this defense is that they must find the precise moves, as I'm telling you. Now, when we use the move queen b6 to keep attacking, you'll tell me, look, chess teacher, we're in the same spot as before. This pawn is being attacked by 3 pieces, and it's not easy to defend either. In fact, the only one they have is bishop e3, and the exact same thing would happen again. I could even exchange knight for bishop, pawn for bishop, and queen for b2, winning a pawn again. However, here they shouldn't play bishop e3, but knight c3 was to make the move knight a4, the only move that saves it for white. Notice that it's already complicated, huh? King f1 would also save it to avoid possible checks later on. However, I doubt they'll use king f1 in your games, okay? Since it would lose the castling right, and if your opponent is very, very good, they might play it. In fact, if your opponent is very, very good, you can rest easy, because whether they do this or another, they'll definitely pressure you, okay? Here, the correct and most used move is knight a4,
Why?
because we continue attacking this point with three pieces. However, they're attacking our queen, so we have to prioritize the queen's defense. What are we going to do? We're simply going to give a check. How? Queen a5 check. Careful, we're attacking with this check. The queen has already moved from the pin. Oh, not the pin, the threat, sorry. And now they have to block the check, right? If, for example, they play bishop d2, we'd simply come with our bishop and look closely that after the exchanges, because otherwise we were going to exchange and we'd end up capturing this pawn here. Look closely. Bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, queen takes queen, and it doesn't matter if knight takes queen or king takes queen, this pawn would be totally defenseless, so it's normal for them to exchange. Once they exchange, we're simply going to capture with the queen, check, and then we're going to capture this pawn here or this pawn here. So notice that it seems bishop d2 doesn't work to block the check, and it's a move that seems super interesting. Also, look closely here that if we do bishop takes and queen takes, they're also leaving this knight here. So, final summary. If we play queen a5, the only possible move they have is knight c3, going back with the knight. Very well, so what should we do if they make the good move and go back with the knight? Well, very simple. We'll go back queen b6 and we'd have this attack here. If you see they get annoying and try to do the same thing again, you got two options. Either look for a draw if your opponent is superior, then you repeat. You repeat moves here and you have a draw. Or try to be a little more aggressive, and what's the more aggressive variation? Well, instead of moving the queen to give a check, come to give a check directly with the bishop. But what result? Now, simply, when they block, which they can do now, we're going to play queen a5 because we have to move the queen. Remember this well, okay? They're attacking our queen. Giving checks is one thing, but giving away the queen is another, right? All right, we move it away and we put pressure here. When they castle, no matter what they do, just bishop takes, and after knight takes, queen takes. If they take the queen, we trade queens, and if they take with the knight, we take here. In both variations, we're going to end up with an extra pawn. Conclusion of this advanced variation. It's very, very simple, as you've been able to see. Our idea is to bring our pieces in to pressure the d4 point. I've also shown you how to play if your opponent makes the best maneuvers. Now, you're going to be very happy, because the first variation I showed you, the advanced variation, is perhaps the one with the most theory. And it's maybe the hardest to understand, though I think I've explained it simply so you can all understand and use it in your games. We have two variations left, the exchange variation and the knight variation. If they play either of these two variations, you can be quite relaxed. Just like the advance, you can be calm if you know it, and this one even more so, because we'll just recapture with the pawn, and attacking ideas are very hard for white. Usually those who play the exchange variation play correctly. Knight f3, to which will respond symmetrically with knight f6. Bishop d3, to which will also respond symmetrically with bishop d6. Why do they play bishop d3? It's very simple, you see. Bishop e2 would also be possible. However, this bishop doesn't do much over here. Instead, from here, it points toward a possible castling. In fact, it can't come here or here because we just play c6, and this bishop would have to retreat, giving us a free tempo. That's why I don't dwell too much on this bishop d3. Just bishop d6 for the same reason, right? It's the best position for this light square bishop for white, and the dark square one for us. Very well. From here, the game can simply continue with castling, right? If your opponent tries to play c4 first, I recommend you capture this pawn and play against this isolated pawn. You should know that whenever there's a double queen pawn, even though the French defense is a king pawn opening, in the exchange variation, it turns into a queen pawn variation. You can already see that it's a double queen pawn. Well, whenever you have a double queen pawn variation, the c pawn is responsible for unbalancing this double central pawn position. So, when they push c4, I'm going to tell you now how you should play with pawn takes pawn. Alright? Very simple. If they don't play c4, they can't really cause you any problems, because notice that is the only problem they can present to you in this situation. Very well. If they castle first, you castle. You just bide your time, right? And when they play c4, pawn takes quad. Very well. Why pawn takes pawn? It might seem like we're improving their bishop and leaving them with a central pawn while we have none. Excuse me. Well, it's because now we're going to cause some serious problems for our opponent. First, this isn't a very well known variation, and we're throwing our opponent off because they don't expect us to trade our central pawn for a side pawn. However, playing against an isolated pawn is very comfortable. For example, knight c6 attacking this pawn. And many of you will say, wait, chess teacher, this move seems weak. We're letting this pawn advance under very favorable conditions. However, this doesn't bother us because we have good retreats for the knight. Knight, a 5 in this case, attacking this bishop. And if it moves here, we'd simply exchange it. And on top of that, we'd be much better off in the position since we'd have a strong bishop pair. Alright, so this bishop has to retreat, not here because it would lose the pawn, so it must go to e2, and then we have a rather surprising move here, which is knight takes pawn. Notice that this was very simple. If you didn't catch it, rewind the video, as I don't want it to get too long. Why can we give away this knight? Very simple. Now this knight can't be taken, because bishop takes would follow with a discovered attack check, and we'd gobble up the queen. That's why we can capture this pawn here without any problems at all. And at this point, we'd be up a pawn. Notice that they couldn't advance this pawn right here. Why am I telling you this? Because notice that here they almost never expect us to capture this pawn, bishop takes, and play against this isolated pawn. And when we attack through here, honestly, many people are going to make the advancing move, which is a slight mistake due to knight a5 attacking the bishop and later being able to sacrifice this knight for a pawn, though we're not really sacrificing anything because this knight is untouchable. But what happens if they don't advance this pawn and continue playing in a completely normal and calm way, such as knight c3? Well, you shouldn't worry at all, because we have a super good position to play here. Notice that we have material equality, however, our opponent has an isolated pawn, which is always a target for attack, so you'll have a very comfortable game. For example, if you don't want any trouble, you play h6, and this bishop can no longer go anywhere significant. For instance, it can only come here. Then you develop your bishop, and you're going to play an extremely comfortable game, where you can fight against this pawn here thanks to the pressure from your pieces. So you'll also find yourself wishing they played this variation against you. Honestly, once this video is over and you've studied it thoroughly, you'll really want to play the French defense because you'll control all of your opponent's responses and you'll like every single one of them. And now we're simply left with the last variation, which is the knight variation, both knight c3 and knight d2. I told you it was exactly the same because we were going to do pawn takes pawn, alright? And now, what difference does it make if the knight is here or there? It must recapture this pawn, and we'd arrive at the same position. Take a good look. The great thing about this video is that by simply mastering these 3 variations, you'll be able to play forever. The French defense. From this point on, if you'd like, you can even expand your knowledge and study even further, right? But if you just study these 3 variations well with this video, believe me, you're going to play the French defense at a very high level, which is a defense that yields spectacular results, even in slow play tournaments. Alright? Alright. What are we going to play here? Well, we simply develop with bishop to e7. Don't worry, this variation is very easy to play, and you're going to love it. We develop this bishop to e7, they keep developing their pieces, knight to f3, we play knight to f6. They have 2 options here, okay? They can exchange or let us exchange. If they exchange, that's great. Why? Because this bishop on f6 is going to become a real attacking machine, right? This bishop here defends the castle. It points toward the queen side. In the future, if we're very worried, we can always pull the bishop back here, and we'll have a super strong castle. And the other option is that they simply, for example, keep developing with bishop to d3, defending this knight, and then we're going to capture, okay? In both cases, don't worry because while the first variation is more theoretical and you need to understand the theory more, in these 2 variations, like the exchange or the 2 knights, where it doesn't really matter where they go, it's more about understanding the concepts, which are very simple if you can grasp them. In this case, if you understand the opening better than your opponent, you'll probably end up winning the game. We castle calmly, it doesn't really matter to us because what's our plan? Well, look, knight to d7, much better than knight to c6. Let me explain why. If you don't understand this plan, you probably say, why knight to d7? No, it's very simple. We just want to relocate it here, where this knight will be much better and will be pointing at the center. You know that this knight here is the best defender of the castle, and on top of that, we gain the initiative. Knight to d7, I don't know, for example, rook to e1, just to say something, and knight, 5-6. Very important. We attack this bishop, which has to retreat. Now, we just need to develop this bishop. And look, many of you will say, well, bishop to d7 already, but even better is b6, because we want to develop the bishop here, and look what a wonderful position. This fianchetto bishop is spectacular. This bishop is super solid. We have very solid pieces. We're not going to lose anything, and they're very well placed. b6, our opponent, for example, can play c3, a very good move to support this d4 point, which, can become very weak at times, as we've seen before. Bishop, b6, and here, for example, queen to c2 attacking here would already be a mistake, because simply with the bishop on b6, we could always open up the king. So here, they should be a bit more careful, and instead of queen to c2, for example, play bishop to f4. How we gotta continue? Well, the plan from now on is very simple. If the bishop comes here, it's blocking itself. We could even enter through here, attacking with great force. The bishop here becomes even more passive. Here it attacks absolutely nothing because this pin is defended by the bishop on e7. We can even attack this bishop and we don't care. So the strongest is bishop to f4. And here we're simply going to exchange these bishops. If it retreats, it'll lose a tempo because now we're attacking here, c5, queen to c7. We put on a lot of pressure. We attack here, okay? So the normal thing here is for them to capture the bishop, obviously. And here you have two options, capture with the queen or capture with the pawn. I recommend with the queen because this pawn can always come to c5 to attack a lot. And notice how this is a pretty solid position. To understand, as I've said here, you shouldn't memorize moves, just the first ones, but especially the ideas. Let's continue with a real game so you can see how these types of openings can proceed. This is very important because this way you'll have a real example of how to play in your games, right? For example, here white played knight e5, greatly improving this knight, and as I just said, c5 is a fundamental move. Why? Because it develops, well, not develops, it squeezes the center, excuse me, with this c pawn, so important, as I always say, to act against this pawn here. Right now, pawn takes pawn is threatened, and surely, although right now it wouldn't work, look closely. Pawn takes pawn takes pawn, queen takes pawn would be a mistake, because simply bishop takes h7 check would come, discovered attack, and we'd lose the queen. Simply pawn takes pawn and pawn takes pawn, we wouldn't need here. We'd play something else, like for example, moving the king or something, and this pawn would be isolated. That's why they capture here. Once they capture, here the black player, instead of recapturing, played queen e5. Queen e5, a great move because it prepares to recapture whenever it wants, but also threatens checkmate. That's why they have to be super careful. White played queen f3, and black, simply what they did was ruin the opponent's pawn structure. How? Queen takes queen, knight takes, bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop. And now what they've done after these changes is ruin and play with the solidity of our pawn structure. You know that recently, I think it was 2 days ago, I posted a video that I recommend 100% if you want to improve your chess level on how to play your pawn structure well and how this will give you many victories. And the game ended quickly. Pawn takes pawn. If you want, finish watching this game and go watch the other video that I'm going to leave in the description. No, white attacked the rook. Look at that way to win. It pressures the b file. It simply has to play b3. Instead of capturing this bishop, which would fix the file the opponent's pawn structure, it plays knight h4. Why? Because he wants to look for knight h5, but he wants to look for knight f4 and improve the position of this knight, which can still become stronger and stronger. Rook d1, rook to 8, facing rooks on open files, c4. I'll go through this faster because it's not important. f5, squeezing this bishop that has to leave. And now, yes, knight f4. And black has a pretty comfortable game. They're going to improve their kings. Okay, notice that both maneuver. He has to try to do something, right? For example, here he first played this one. Although it's different because after the changes, he came to give this check. This white king has to move. And now look closely how black starts to pressure. This position is totally won. And whatever white does, look, here he stops any possible counterattack. He comes to exchange here, and it's clear that this position is too easy to squeeze for the black pieces. Look, check on g2. The king has to move to the dark squares so the bishop doesn't get in the way, and the black king penetrates like no other. And this position is completely won. Once you have your opponent's pieces tied down, you use your pieces to go and win. The pawns, look closely. This pawn is going to be won no matter how much he tries to defend it. Why? Because the king was also in charge of defending this bishop. And this is a completely one pawn endgame for black. Why? Because the king is much more active. I won't dwell on it. Look closely. I'll go through it quickly. Here, black simply manages to win with great ease. White is never going to be able to promote a pawn, not even close. Look at how much they have left, and black would manage to promote with plenty of time to spare. So I hope you loved this video on the French defense. If you've made it to the end, please, I'm asking you, leave a like. It costs you nothing, and share it with your friends so you can be the best players and help each other out. This defense, one of my favorite defenses, I hope I've explained it wonderfully so that you've all understood me, and I hope you put it into practice. See you tomorrow, friends, and another new video. Goodbye.